Good morning. Today's video I'm simply going to call hands-on. Of all the tools you use when you're carving decoys, believe it or not, one of the most important ones is your own hands. You'd be surprised how they help you in the carving of decoys, not only for holding your tools or your Dremels or your drill presses, or you're working with your hands all the time, no matter how you look at it. But in some of the little finer details, the hands really come in helpful. For example, decoys are not like this. They're curved, they're rounded. And what's perfect on your hands is if you look at your hands and you take your fingers like that, they're basically rounded. So when you pick up a decoy and you want to see how it is in terms of being round, you can put your hands right on it like that and you can kind of feel. Hands are very smooth, very sensitive. So as you're moving around that decoy, your hands are almost a perfect way of figuring out if that bird is round. It also helps you in the case of, before you seal a bird in particular, you run your fingers along the bird to see how smooth it is. Like for example, this one that I'm working on is extremely smooth. If there's any little dents or dings or anything in there, you're going to feel it when your hand goes across it. Then you take your wood putty, fill that in, and then of course after that you just simply can, sand it down with a sanding block like this, or just a piece of sandpaper. Now that's the other thing your hands going to be handy for. I've told you how you can use your fingers when you're smoothing out putty around the joints of a neck, or I used to talk about using the popsicle sticks. But your fingers are good too. You can wet your finger and you can just kind of run it around after you put the putty on, especially if you let it set for a while. You run your finger around there. Now your fingers are different sizes, so if you need a big spot, you take your thumb and you could smooth out like this with the thumb on that part of it. If you need to get in the back, which is a little tighter, you can use your pinky and go in with your pinky and go around there. It also helps you with the eye positioning. You put your fingers on the eyes and you can aim them down at that angle I always talk about with the popsicle sticks, where you can see if you got the right angle, you can push and move them around with your fingertips and get into those particular spots. Another thing they're good for is if you notice on a lot of the ducks and the decoys, there's like a line around the bill from the nail back a little and then in the very back there. Your fingernail is almost the right exact length, especially if you don't trim them down too tight. You can take just your finger sometimes if you have the right wood, it's not too hard. Just stick it in there and move your finger in and put that little groove in. Because you're just about the right height. You're not up too far. You're like right in there. So you can move your finger in there and then you can go up to that front part and move it around to the front. You can put your finger in there like that. Fingers are also good when the tail is carved out. For example, on this bird I'm working on, you can take your fingernail and just kind of run it into each of those slots to make sure they're nice and smooth. You just keep going like that. Just see if they're nice and smooth. And then if you see a little high spot, you can come in with a sanding block and just kind of sand that off. Now another nice feature is once you seal a bird, you're now sealing that wood. Now it becomes a little more difficult now to get rid of bumps and lumps once it's sealed, because the wood is not absorbing anything now. It's sealed, which is making it waterproof. But and running your hand across the sealed bird, you can feel any kind of lump or roughness. Like right now, I'm running my hand along here. It's pretty smooth all the way around. But right here, I notice a little rough spot. So you can sense that because your hands and your fingers are very sensitive to that. So what do? You take your little sanding block and you hit that. Just move it around. It's knocking off that finish a little, but it's smoothing it out. So your hands are important in that respect. Again, the shaping of the bird, the smoothness of the bird, the cutting out of the tails in the back with your fingers, the checking the eye alignment, the putting the eyes in, the actual cutting out on the top and in the use of the bill. You actually can run your fingers in there. Now you could of course, put a pencil line on there like I did on here. You can probably see that on that bill. There's like a little pencil line that I drew on there. So you can take a little knife and just kind of edge that in a little bit. And then after you do that, to get it rounded out, you can run your fingernail in there and just kind of make that thing a little smooth, get it to grind out a little bit. There's also a tool, these are called burnishing tools. The little tips are on the end there if you see them. After you do that, after you get that fingernail cut in there, you can take that little tool and just kind of run it in there. What it does is it kind of rounds that out because it's like a round tip on the end there. So it rounds it out so you just don't have a straight in cut. And then of course you can take your sandpaper and of course smooth it out a little bit with the sandpaper. And again, the sandpaper, your fingers act as that curve on the sandpaper. So you put that right in the sandpaper. So when you got to get some rough spots out, you can just do that. You've got that natural curve of your finger curving that sandpaper for you. So if you look at it right there. So another interesting thing. Just little tiny points that I've learned over the years that are kind of important. You know, all the tools are important at one phase or another in the carving of a decoy. But your hands, I mean, thank God you got two of me to work with. They're very helpful in getting a decoy into the kind of shape you want to get it into for a lot of different purposes. Rounding out the putty, carving in little details, aligning eyes, checking the background on the tails, and then the overall smoothness of the bird. And then when you seal it with the gesso, which is another point, the gesso, when you seal the bird like I did this one with the acrylic coating, that's what's waterproofing the bird. And that's fairly smooth unless you see a rough spot, you can get rid of it. Then you put the gesso or gesso, I don't know how they say it. You put that on there and you'll actually feel there's a little bit of texture when the gesso gives it what you call tooth. So as you see that, when you put the gesso on, and I use a clear gesso, so my pattern that I have on the bird is going to be visible through what gives me a little guide when I'm trying to paint it. So you just run that around there and you'll feel a little bit of tooth on there. If it's a little heavy in spots, which it could be, just lightly hit it with the sandpaper. But you want that tooth because you want that paint to adhere to it. So those are just a couple of little minor things in today's lesson that I think you'll find useful in your carving process. Thank you.